Alright, so I'm going to do a little video here about conservation easements, sort of an update video. Today's September 30th, 2022. And I'm doing a video to go along with a written version of all this information that we have and prepared. I mean, some might call it a white paper. But basically, it's an update on what is going on with conservation easement legislation, kind of what's been going on with the IRS and everything. But it kind of gives you, I'm going to try to give you a good sense of kind of what the overall status is, but then what some of the key details are. And if warranted or applicable, I'll give you my own personal commentary on it. Try to add some context to things. So the video might be a little bit longer than you're hoping for, and hopefully you find a lot of it relevant, but I'm going to try to cover everything because I don't want to leave anything out. And I think it's all relevant to the status of conservation easement partnerships. So I'm not using a teleprompter. I've got my notes here in front of me, and so I'm going to be looking at those and refer to those as we go. So hopefully that's okay. This is not maybe quite as formal as I would usually do. So as you know, there's been, over the past, a few years, I mean, I've been doing conservation projects or involved with them in some respect, or looking at them, supporting them, whatever, since 2009. Conservation easements have been in the tax code for decades. That's nothing necessarily that new. They've just been kind of coming under scrutiny more recently, and people that aren't familiar with them, which is a lot, that scrutiny can kind of make it seem like they're this brand new thing, or there's some sort of tax shelter, et cetera, et cetera. But I assure you, look at 170H in the tax code. It's all there, and you can see a lot of court cases and a lot of updates as to what's going on legislatively. But suffice to say, before I get into the details here, I will say that overall, kind of how I see it is that the IRS has been challenging a lot of conservation easement partnerships. And it's not going well for them, okay, overall. They are not really winning. For there was a while where, back to 2014-15, where they were finding some technical faults in them, in some of the projects, or some gray areas, et cetera, and they were finding certain areas that were leading to certain I would call them adjustments, right? I mean, certainly there was some completely bogus ones, but you have bogus deductions in any area, and they're always catching people on that stuff. So, there were some people trying to take advantage of things, and some people were using land that doesn't even exist. Some people were using land that doesn't even come close to qualify. Some people didn't even know what they were doing and didn't even have close to the amount of documentation they needed to get through it. With that being said, there's been a lot of heat on them lately, but the heat has also allowed a lot of people that are competent that are doing these projects to kind of iron out any wrinkles that they might need to. And we've learned from cases and just in the profession in general, the AICPA and whatever's going around, lots of legal sort of publications as to kind of what the IRS has been targeting and why they're targeting it and how the court system has seen it, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that recently, it's gotten to the point now where everybody kind of knows what to do to make sure that all the wrinkles are ironed out, and dot all I's and cross all T's. And so as the IRS has kind of challenged these things, they're running into real sort of walls as far as trying to challenge these deductions. Okay, and it's really no surprise that they would be going after these deductions. It's a lot of money. Remember, the IRS, I don't blame them for this. I mean, they are in charge of recovering tax money that is owed, and they are going to target more complex and more valuable type of deductions, because the chances that there is a mistake in something that is high complexity and a lot of rules need to be followed and high dollar amounts, that overall they're going to recover some taxes there, right? I mean, it's just playing the percentages, right? So it's no surprise that they would be targeting an area like this. But that being said, they have not had a lot of success lately in recovering additional monies from these projects. And so, which very rationally, I think they have shifted gears toward legislation and saying, going to various congressmen and saying, hey, we need to adjust some of this legislation because we don't like what's going on in some of these things, and we're going to try to make you not like it either. But we can't, there's things that we don't think are right, and we can't win in court on them because people are following the law. So we want you to change the law so that we can, I think part of it is to kind of save face, and the other part is to just make their lives easier and make the rules more clear, so that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish, but they don't have to challenge it in court. It's just that it becomes part of the law, and so they can kind of circumvent challenging these projects. And I really would think that if there's some legislation changing things that they want changed, that you'll see the audits go way down. And I don't think that I don't think they'll be challenging them as hard anymore, because I think once the law is in place, they're going to get what they wanted, right? And so, and if we just follow the law, they're not going to have a lot of incentive to come after the projects. So anyway, let's go into kind of what's going on. So right now, there's a bill in Congress, and it has a provision there for conservation easements, and it's basically set to amend the rules for syndicated conservation easements. One thing that's important is that it's not going to affect fee simple donations. So some of you may be familiar with a fee simple donation, which is basically you're donating the entire piece of land. It's just a straight up donation, and you basically just handing the keys over. Versus a conservation, where conservation is you're basically giving up certain rights. You're still retaining title to the land, but you're giving up certain rights of that land. And so, what you're really doing is you're devaluing the land with the conservation, and they're giving you a deduction for that amount that you are devaluing the land. So it's a little different. And with conservation, you can deduct up to 50% of your income, and with fee simple, you can only deduct up to 30%. But suffice to say, these type of charitable donations and land projects are not going away, even if this entire thing passes as is, because people will still be doing fee simple donations. Okay, it's just that the conservation easement option or strategy is going to be modified. Okay, so let's talk through a little bit about what they're trying to do with this legislation. Again, it is not passed. It is not. It's still in the early. I think it's still in fairly early stages, though it could happen pretty quickly because it's in a very live bill right now. But there are a lot of terms in it that are being proposed that are problematic, that I think are going to be further amended. So I don't think the final language in this legislation is going to be necessarily that close to what's in there now, but we can go through it step by step. So the most important thing that you have to know is that they are removing the retroactive provisions, right? So if you're not familiar, for a while, the Internal Revenue Service and certain congressmen on their side were pushing to make any changes to the conservation easement rules retroactive, meaning that if they changed the law, that we would go back to 2018 and everything that happened then would apply then and forward, right? Which would lead to huge penalties, so basically it's like they're changing the rules after the game's already been played and going back and changing the result, right? I mean, it's very problematic, a lot of pushback on that, and they were not successful in getting any support for that, right? So that's the good news, is that provision and anything related to retroactive is gone, and that gave people a lot of heartache. And I know why. It's because, if you play a game and then someone changes the rules later and you find out you actually lost, even though you played by the rules. That can be pretty shocking. So anyway, that's gone. So the retroactive problem is behind us, which is good news for that in that respect. There is a provision where they would like to limit the deduction to 2.5 times your investment basis, and in simple math, what that means is if you were to make an investment in a syndicated conservation partnership of say $100,000, then they would limit the amount of deduction that you can receive on the K1 when you get it back to $250,000, right? Right now, how it works, and I mean, it should work this way, in my opinion, is you get a deduction for the actual value, right? And they want to limit that and say, no, you shouldn't get a deduction for the actual value. We want to limit it to 2.5 times. And I think the theory behind this is, we don't want people making profit on this. Basically, it's if you want to put 100,000 in and get a deduction for 250, and that saves you 100,000 in taxes, and that's even Steven. Okay, fine. But I think that, so I understand that, but I really think that that's not considering enough steps ahead. And you have to understand that if you don't provide any economic incentive, conservation will dry up, right? And of course, we have Biden's 30 and 30 plan, where he wants to have 30% of the country conserved by 2030, and the whole green movement and everything. They have to have incentive for people to conserve land, right? Or they'll have no chance of getting there. So you're basically taking away all the economic incentive, and it's not going to happen, right? If you do that, it's just it's going to completely just kill all the conservation, and that's my opinion. There's just no reason to do it, and everybody will do fee simple anyway, and so people will just take full deductions on fee simple and just go that way. So it won't really help them very much. So in that way, it's a little bit silly. It's kind of nonsense. I'm hoping that sort of level heads will prevail on that one and see that this will basically kill the conservation effort, right? Which is supposed to be so important. So it limit 2.5, and that's just going forward. So and if that's how it works, if my heart really wants to just do conservation only, and I don't really care about the economic impact, I can still do conservation. But you tell me. If you're going to get no financial benefit from doing it, do you want to take that risk? Do you want to get involved? Do you want to bother with it? I would think most people wouldn't. So I don't find that one very likely to stick. The next one would be that there's a provision to disallow donations entirely after a certain date, right? So not all of these are going together. These are more like not all of them would happen at the same time. A lot of these provisions would be either or, not exist altogether, right? Because why would you care about 2.5 times deduction if you eliminate it altogether, right? So what they're talking about is they'll draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I think December 1st was the first date talked about doing this. They just draw a line in the sand and say, okay, any conservation project that you have to have it all filed by November 30th in order to take the deduction. You can still have your carry forwards. There's still a 15-year carry forward for anything, but after that, they just effectively kill it. And at that point, they kill it. We just can't do it anymore after a certain date, and we pivot to the fee simple donation type structure. Okay, so that's in there. What that means is, if it does pass and there is a date in the future, hypothetically, somebody could put enough funds into conservation projects on November 30th, and they could buy 10 years worth, right? And so they could just carry that thing forward for the next 10 years, right? But you have to meet that, you have to jump through that little hoop of the fact is that the conservation project, the donation has to be made before a certain date in order to get that, right? So it kind of would create a little bit of hustle and some urgency in doing this. As the date's getting closer to December 1st, and I haven't seen or heard of any action on this, I'm finding it more than likely it's going to happen this year. But I don't think that that's necessarily far-fetched to say that they will pass something like that in the future. So that's just something we've got to keep an eye on and make sure that we know that, hey, look, there's going to be a date on this thing, and before that you can do it. But it's almost like when they did prohibition, and they said, okay, alcohol is legal until December 1st, and so you had people going into liquor stores on Thanksgiving and buying 30 bottles of gin, right? Okay, and it'd be kind of like that, right? So that's there's a potential that they will pass this 2.5 times limitation, but do certain carve-outs for certain types of projects, right? So now you have conservation projects where there's the highest and best use value may be development. It could be commercial development, it could be residential development, right? And that's the valuation of the project. That's the highest and best use value of the land. Well, because of the environment and the green energy effort, and I do find that this likely would happen if they get this 2.5 times provision, is that this 2.5 times investment provision would exclude certain types of projects. And the types of those projects is oil, coal, and natural gas, right? So in other words, if you're conserving land and that's going to eliminate the potential pollution that this land can generate, we're going to give you a pass on the 2.5, and you can do the value like you've always done, right? So I do find that likely as well. Now we at Credo, and it's really me that does most of the down and dirty due diligence, and I go to the sites and everything, and I know how to kind of evaluate the valuation of these things and do the due diligence on it. We have been doing oil and coal and mineral rights, like granite and stuff like that, types of projects for the past few years. I don't like doing real estate transactions. I just think it's too gray, and I just think there's too much ambiguity and too much for the IRS to kind of sink their teeth into. That doesn't mean that they're bad or that people aren't following the law, and I just don't care for them, because I just think there's just too much gray. I like things that are solid, like, you got this much oil, this is the price, and bam, there's your value, right? It just makes it a lot easier. And so, if they do the carve out like we're thinking they would, if this passes, the oil, coal, and natural gas will be exempt from it, and those are the only projects that we're looking at right now anyway, so it won't even affect anybody that kind of works with us and all the due diligence efforts we put into all this stuff, and everything we've learned about these projects will not be in vain. Will continue to go. So even if they do pass this bill, even some of these provisions that are not as favorable as we'd hope, I do think that carve out's likely, okay, because there's a lot of pressure on congressmen to the green energy, the environment, right?